are back again today, coming in from a different angle this time. And we are again focusing on this concept of motivation. So yesterday's focus was on motivation, and we were focusing on Stanley, and specifically about what was his motivation for giving X-Ray the tube. What does he want? And so I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I think the reason that Stanley decides that, if he finds something, he's going to hand it over to X-Ray. He finally gives the tube to X-Ray is because he wants to fit in. Right? He kind of gets the sense that X-Ray is running the show. Like, remember we had a Google Classroom discussion about why do the boys always line up in the same order? And there's definitely an order of who goes where. And X-Ray's at the top. And Stanley doesn't want to be the odd man out. He sees how they treat Zero. He knows that's not what he wants. And so it impacted the way he was thinking, acting, feeling, and speaking. He's thinking, I've got to fit in, I've got to make friends. How he acted, he gave X-Ray the tube. How he was feeling like it was really important for him to be a part of it. He didn't want to feel like he was on the outside, so he wanted to feel included, right? It made him feel motivated. Remember, we're talking about motivation to fit in. So that was his motivation, or the reason why he gives X-Ray the tube. So what we're going to see today is the aftermath of the tube, okay? And so we've kind of seen the warden. She's out there. She, says, excuse me, all sassy like, right? She's not a super nice person. And we're going to see what happens now that she has found something that she calls interesting. So today we're going to be in chapters 15 through 18. I'm on page 69 if you want to be following along with me. Today, I forgot to put the in on there. It says Wardy. Hang on. We're going to fix it. It's just like a real lesson, right, guys? Where I mess up and everything. Hang on. I'll fix it. Warden. There we go. What does the warden want? So at this point, we focused on Elia, we focused on Stanley, and today we're going to focus on the warden. What does she want, and how is it going to impact how she's thinking, acting, feeling? And remember, the thinking and the speaking are tied together in our graphic organizer. If you've been struggling with this graphic organizer, because you've already done it twice, please reach out to me and let me know, and I will do whatever I can to help. Okay, kiddos? Here we go. We are on page 69. Chapter 15. Hello, we have a visitor. Hello. I'm reading.
Howdy, children.
They can't see you.
Howdy, children.
Love you. Okay, go away so I can read. Sorry. Okay. It's just like when he calls and interrupts class. It's the same thing. Okay? Chapter 15, page 69. Mr. Pendanski filled the canteens. The warden got a pitchfork out of the back of the pickup. She poked it through X-Ray's dirt pile to see if anything else might have been buried in there as well. After you drop off X-Ray, I want you to bring back these 3 wheelbarrows, she said. X-Ray got in the pickup. As the truck pulled away, he leaned out the wide window and waved. Zero, said the warden. I want you to take over X-Ray's hole. She seemed to know that Zero was the fastest digger. Armpit and Squid, you'll keep digging where you've been, she said, but you're each going to have a helper. Zigzag, you help Armpit. Magnet, you will help Squid. And Caveman, you'll work with Zero. We're going to have to dig the dirt twice. Zero will dig it out of the hole, and Caveman will very carefully shovel it to the wheelbarrow. Zigzag will do the same for Armpit, and the same with Magnet and Squid. We don't want to miss anything. If either of you find something, you'll both get the rest of the day off. And a double shower. When the wheelbarrows are full, you are to dump them away from this area. We don't want any dirt piles in the way. She seems very organized, almost like she's done this before, right? The warden remained at the site for the remainder of the day, along with Mr. Pendanski and Mr. Sir, who showed up after a while. Occasionally, Mr. Sir would leave to take water to the other groups of campers, but otherwise, he and the water truck stayed parked there. The warden saw to it that nobody in Group D was ever thirsty. Stanley did what he was told. He carefully looked through all the dirt dug up by Zero, and he shoveled it into a wheelbarrow, though he knew he wouldn't find anything. How does Stanley know they're not going to find anything? It's because that's not where the tube was found. Remember, Stanley found it the day before in a different area. They're digging in a whole new spot today. So Stanley's like, I know we're not going to find anything because this isn't where the tube was supposed to be. It was easier than digging his own hole. When the wheelbarrow was full, he took it a good distance away before dumping it. The warden couldn't keep still. She kept walking around, looking over the boy's shoulder, and sticking her pitchfork through the dirt piles. "You're doing fine, just fine," she told Stanley. After a while, she told the boys to switch places, so that Stanley, Zigzag, and Magnet dug the holes. Zero, Armpit, and Squid shoveled the excavated dirt into the wheelbarrows. After lunch, Zero took over the digging again, and Stanley returned to the wheelbarrow. "There's no hurry," the warden said several times. "The main thing is not to miss anything." The boys dug until each hole was well over 6 feet deep and wide. Still, it was easier for 2 boys to dig a 6-foot hole than it was for 1 boy to dig a 5-foot hole. "All right, that's enough for today," the warden said. "I've waited this long. I can wait another day." What does she mean, I've waited this long? I've waited this long. Remember, today we're focusing on what does the warden want, okay? And we may not get a super clear picture, but we know she wants something. So you're gonna kind of have to think about what is she wanting. And obviously, she's waited a long time for it. Mr. Sir drove her back to her cabin. "I wonder how she knew all our names," Stanley said as he walked back to the compound. "She watches us all the time," said Zigzag. "She's got hidden microphones and cameras all over the place. In the tents, in the rec room, the shower." "The shower?" asked Stanley. He wondered if Zigzag was just being paranoid. "The cameras are tiny," said Armpit. "No bigger than a toenail on your little toe." Stanley had his doubts about that. He didn't think they could make cameras that small. Microphones, maybe. Now remember that, kiddos, we actually know that today they can make microphones this small, but guys, this was made in, and remember, we know our cover pages give us this information. This book was made in 1998. Y'all weren't even alive yet, okay? The iPhone was not around, okay? This book is just about 5 years younger than Miss Megan's. I'm a little bit older than this book. But they didn't have little bitty cameras like them. Back then we had to haul around those big cameras to take pictures with, okay? So he's saying that there's no way that there's a camera that tiny. But now we know that there are. He realized that that's why X-Ray didn't want to talk to him about the gold tube at breakfast. X-Ray was afraid that the warden might have been listening. Remember, X-Ray had been snapping at him like, "Don't talk to me, I don't know what you're talking about." And it's because he was afraid the warden was listening to him. One thing was certain. They weren't just digging to build character. They were definitely looking for something. And whatever they were looking for, they were looking in the wrong place. Stanley gazed out across the lake toward the spot where he'd been digging yesterday when he found the gold tube. He dug the hole into his memory. Okay, kiddos, I'm on chapter 16, page 72. As Stanley entered the rec room, he could hear X-Ray's voice from all the way across the room. "See what I'm saying?" X-Ray said. "Am I right or am I right?" The other bodies in the room were little more than bags of flesh and bones dumped across broken chairs and couches. X-Ray was full of life, laughing and waving his arms around as he talked. "Yo, caveman, my man," he called out. Stanley made his way across the room. "Hey, slide over, Squid," said X-Ray. "Make room for the caveman." Stanley crashed on the couch. He had looked for a hidden camera in the shower. He hadn't seen anything. He hoped that the warden hadn't either. "What's the matter?" asked X-Ray. "You guys tired or something?" he laughed. Remember, X-Ray got the whole day off, right? They were out there digging, and not just their regular hole, but all their huge, big holes for the warden to see if she can't find something. We don't know what. And so X-Ray's kind of being sarcastic here. "Hey, keep it down, will ya?" groaned Zigzag. "I'm trying to watch TV." Stanley glanced uncertainly at Zigzag, who was staring very intently at the busted TV screen. The warden greeted the boys at breakfast the next morning and went with them to the holes. 4 dug in the holes and 3 tended to the wheelbarrows. "Glad you're here, X-Ray," she said. "We need your sharp eyes." Stanley spent more time pushing the wheelbarrow than digging because he was such a slow digger. He carted away the excess dirt and dumped it into previously dug holes. He was careful not to dump any of it into the hole where the gold tube had actually been found. He could still see the tube in his mind. It seemed so familiar, but he just couldn't place it. He thought that it might have been the lid of a fancy gold pen. KB could have been the initials of a famous author. The only famous authors he could think of were Charles Dickens, William Shakespeare, and Mark Twain. Besides, they didn't really look like the top of a pen. By lunchtime, the warden was beginning to lose her patience. She made them eat quickly so they could get back to work. If you can't get them to work any faster, she told Mr. Sir, then you're going to have to climb down there and dig with them. After that, everyone worked faster. Nobody wants Mr. Sir in the hole with them, especially when Mr. Sir was watching them. Stanley practically ran when he pushed his wheelbarrow. Mr. Sir reminded them that they weren't Girl Scouts. They didn't quit digging until after every other group had finished. Later, as Stanley sat sprawled across an unstuffed chair, he tried to think of a way to tell the warden where the tube had really been found, without getting himself or X-ray into trouble. It didn't seem possible. He even thought about sneaking out at night and digging in the hole by himself, but the last thing he wanted to do after digging all day was to dig at night, too. Besides, the shovels were locked up at night, presumably so they couldn't be used as weapons. Mr. Pendanski entered the rec room. Stanley, he called as he made his way to him. His name's Caveman, said X-ray. Stanley, said Mr. Pendanski. My name's Caveman, said Stanley. Well, I have a letter here for someone named Stanley Yelnats, said Mr. Pendanski. He turned over an envelope in his hands. It doesn't say Caveman anywhere. Thanks, Stanley said, taking it. It was from his mother. Who's it from? Squid asked. Your mother? Stanley put it in his big pocket of his pants. Are you going to read it to us? Asked Armpit. Give him some space, said X-ray. If Caveman doesn't want to read it to us, he doesn't have to. It's probably from his girlfriend. Stanley smiled. He read it later after the other boys had gone to dinner. Dear Stanley, it was wonderful to hear from you. Your letter made me feel like one of the other moms who could afford to send their kids to summer camp. I know it's not the same, but I'm very proud of you for trying to make the best of a bad situation. Who knows? Maybe something good will come of this. Your father thinks he's real close to a breakthrough on his sneaker project. I hope so. The landlord is threatening to evict us because of the odor. Evict means kick out. I feel sorry for the little old lady who lived in a shoe. It must have smelled awful. Love from both of us. What's so funny? Zero asked. It startled him. He thought Zero had gone to dinner with the others. Nothing, just something my mom wrote. What'd she say? Zero asked. Nothing. Oh, sorry, said Zero. Well, see, my dad is trying to invent a way to recycle old sneakers. So the apartment kind of smells bad because he's always cooking these old sneakers. So anyway, in the letter, my mom said she felt sorry for the little old lady who lived in a shoe. You know, because it must have smelled bad in there. Zero stared at him blankly. You know the nursery rhyme? Zero said nothing. You've heard the nursery rhyme about the little old lady who lived in a shoe? No. Stanley was amazed. How did it go? Asked Zero. Didn't you ever watch Sesame Street? Stanley asked. Zero stared blankly. Stanley headed on to dinner. He would have felt pretty silly reciting nursery rhymes at Camp Green Lake. Why do you think Zero maybe doesn't know any of these things or doesn't respond? I want you to kind of start thinking about Zero because we're going to start focusing on him next. For the next week and a half, the boys continued to dig in an area around where X-ray had supposedly found the gold tube. They widened X-ray's hole as well as the holes Armpit and Squid had been digging until the fourth day when all three holes met and made one big hole. As the days went on, the warden became less and less patient. She arrived later in the morning and left earlier in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the boys continued to dig later and later. This is no bigger than when I left you yesterday, she said after arriving late one morning, well after sunrise. What have you been doing down there? Nothing, said Squid. It was the wrong thing to say. At just that moment, Armpit was returning from a bathroom break. How nice of you to join us, she said. And what have you been doing? I had to, go. The warden jabbed at Armpit with her pitchfork, knocking him backward into the big hole. The pitchfork left 3 holes in the front of his shirt and 3 tiny spots of blood. You're giving these boys too much water, the warden told Mr. Pendanski. They continued to dig until late afternoon, long after the other groups had finished for the day. Stanley was down in the big hole along with the other 6 boys. They had stopped using the wheelbarrows. He dug his shovel into the side of the hole. He scooped up some dirt and was raising it up to the surface when Zigzag's shovel caught him in the side of the head. He collapsed. He wasn't sure if he passed out or not. He looked up to see Zigzag's wild head staring down at him. "I ain't digging that dirt up," Zigzag said. "That's your dirt." "Hey, Mom," Magnet called. "Caveman's been hurt." Stanley brought his fingers up to the side of his neck. He felt his wet blood and a pretty big gash just below his ear. Magnet helped Stanley to his feet, then up and out of the hole. Mr. Stanley made a bandage out of a piece of his sack of sunflower seeds and taped it over Stanley's wound. Then he told him to get back to work. It isn't nap time. When Stanley returned to the hole, Zigzag was waiting for him. "That's your dirt," Zigzag said. "You have to dig it up. It's covering up my dirt." Stanley felt a little dizzy. He could see a small pile of dirt. It took him a moment to realize that it was the dirt which had been on his shovel when he was hit. He scooped it up, then Zigzag dug his shovel into the ground underneath where Stanley's dirt had been. So I also want you to think, why is Stanley still letting them, like he says it's a week and a half. They're digging and they're digging. It's getting later and it's getting later. The boys are getting cranky. So why doesn't Stanley just fess up and say that this isn't where the tube is? Okay, what's his motivation, okay, for keeping that quiet, right? Well, he doesn't want to get in trouble. He knows if he tells the warden that that's probably not going to turn out very good for him. All right, kiddos, we are almost done with today. We are on page 80, chapter 18. This is our last one. The next morning, Mr. Sir marched the boys to another section of the lake, and each boy dug his own hole, 5 feet deep and 5 feet wide. Stanley was glad to be away from the big hole. At least now he knew just how much he had to dig for the day, and it was a relief not to have other shovels swinging past his face, or the warden hanging around. He dug his shovel into the dirt, then slowly turned to dump it into a pile. He had to make his turn smooth and slow. If he jerked too quickly, he felt a throbbing pain just above his neck where Zigzag's shovel had hit him. That part of his head, between his neck and ear, was considerably swollen. There were no mirrors in the camp, but he imagined he looked like he had a hard-boiled egg sticking out of him. The remainder of his body hardly hurt at all. His muscles had strengthened and his hands were tough and calloused. He was still the slowest digger, but not all that much slower than Magnet. Less than 30 minutes after Magnet returned to camp, Stanley spat in his hole. So he's getting faster, right? After a shower, he put his dirty clothes in the crate and got out his box of stationery. He stayed in the tent to write the letter to Squid. Write the letter so Squid and the other boys wouldn't make fun of him for writing his mother. Dear Mom and Dad, camp is hard but challenging. We've been running obstacle courses and have to swim long distances on the lake. Tomorrow we learn. He stopped writing as Zero walked into the tent, then returned to his letter. He didn't care what Zero thought. Zero was nobody. To rock climb. I know that sounds scary, but don't worry. Zero was standing beside him now, watching him write. Stanley turned and felt his neck throb. I don't like it when you read over my shoulder, okay? Zero said nothing. I'll be careful. It's not all fun and games here, but I think I'm getting a lot out of it. It builds character. The other boys, I don't know how, said Zero. What? Can you teach me? Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. Teach you to what? Rock climb? Zero stared at him with penetrating eyes. What? Said Stanley. He was hot, tired, and sore. I want to learn to read and write, said Zero. Stanley let out a short laugh. He wasn't laughing at Zero, he was just surprised. All this time, he had thought Zero was reading over his shoulder. Sorry, he said. I don't know how to teach. After digging all day, he didn't have the strength to try to teach Zero to read and write. He needed to save his energy for the people who counted. So he said Zero is nobody, and right here he says he needed to save his energy for the people who counted. So that obviously means to him Zero doesn't count, right, as someone worth spending time on. So what does Stanley think of Zero? Okay. You don't have to teach me to write, said Zero, just to read. I don't have anybody to write to. Sorry, Stanley said again. His muscles and hands weren't the only parts of his body that had toughened over the past several weeks. His heart had hardened as well. He finished his letter. He barely had enough moisture in his mouth to seal and stamp the envelope. It seemed that no matter how much water he drank, he was always thirsty. So Stanley's kind of changing a little bit while he's at camp, right? We kind of get the perception that like Stanley was a nice guy, you know, kind to others. You know, he'd been bullied at school. He knew what it felt like to get bullied. But we're kind of started seeing him turn into kind of a tough guy, right? And he's saying zero's nothing, zero doesn't count, and how his heart had hardened, and he's just straight up telling Zero, no, I'm not going to help you. So Stanley's kind of changing as well, and we'll tackle that, and we'll tackle our perception of Zero tomorrow. So today what I want you to do, now that you're done with your reading, this is what you're focusing on. What does the warden want? How does it impact how she's thinking, acting, feeling? And then we say speaking, but we're tying that in to the thinking part, right? So through the first 3 chapters, 15, 16, 17, we really got to see the warden. This is the first time we had real big interaction with the warden. So what do you think she wants? Okay, and even if we don't know exactly what she wants, we know she wants something. We know where she's trying to look for it. And how does it impact how she's thinking, acting, and feeling? Okay, kiddos, I love y'all. If you need help, please let me know. If you need anything, I'm here for you. I love you guys, and I'll see you later.